Camera RAW just got a huge update in Photoshop. Today we're giving you the tour and merging together images to create an HDR. Hey there and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace. You can find me at phlearn.com where we make learning fun. And I'm personally super excited they updated Camera RAW. They've added some new features, which they just added to Lightroom as well. But overall, they just gave it a facelift and it looks a little bit more modern. And I think for any of you Lightroom users out there, you're now gonna find Camera RAW a lot more intuitive. So let's go ahead and bring in some raw images and show you around. So here we are in Photoshop. Now, the deal with Photoshop is you can't just open a raw image directly into Photoshop. It has to go through Camera RAW first. So let's go ahead and take a series of images. I shot these recently on a road trip in, this is actually through Kansas. We're just gonna click on 5 different DNG images and pull these right into Camera RAW. And you can see already our layout is much cleaner. I think they did a fantastic job with this. Now, if you wanna follow along, you can actually download all of these raw images on Phlearn.com. Just click on the link right down below. So we have a film strip that we're gonna be very familiar with from anyone who's used Lightroom. This is basically some bracketed shots that I shot out in Kansas. Just in general, anytime I'm shooting landscapes, I like to do bracketed shots because I can merge them together to create an HDR. So let's go ahead and get started with that. It's super easy to do. Just hold Shift and click on all the images you want. The film strip makes it much easier. We're gonna right click and we're just gonna go to Merge to HDR. And here you can see Merge to HDR. Yep, looks great. Now, in this case, it's actually just gonna ask us to save it as a new file, which I'm totally cool with. So let's go ahead and hit save. And here you can see, this is our final HDR. Basically, this just contains information from each one of these images. So I could do things like bring up my shadow levels if I want to, and I've got a lot more information than any one of these images to begin with. So let's go ahead and give you a little tour up. Basically at the very top right, you have your adjustments, and here you have your basic adjustments. Go down, the curve tool is all new as well. I really like what they've done with the coloring here. If you want to add more reds, greens, or blues, I think this has been a much needed feature, honestly, for years, because who remembers that up is more green and down is more magenta? Now you don't have to remember it. It shows you right there, which is fantastic. So the curve tools work really well, detail, sharpening, things like that. I think they just laid it out. It's all the same tools we're used to. It's just a new layout. And all of the actual editing tools are here on the right instead of being on the top. So we have our crop, we have our heal. This is basically the adjustment brush, graduated filter, and radial filter. So for instance, if I want to grab my graduated filter and click from the bottom up, there we go. Now I can just take my shadow levels and make those a little bit brighter. And you know what, while I'm at it, I want to just make our ground a little bit warmer in color temperature. So I'm going to just take our color temperature and make it a little bit warmer as well. I'm gonna make some adjustments. And if you guys are Lightroom users, these tools should feel very, very intuitive for you. Basically, they are the exact same tools. And in fact, Camera RAW and Lightroom use the same core software to actually do all this calculation. So they're both raw editors. Lightroom is a lot more for organization. Camera RAW is basically just an intermediate step between going from your raw images straight into Photoshop. So if you want to keep everything organized and see an entire catalog of images, Lightroom is the way to go. If you're just like, I just have these images and I want to pull them into Photoshop, but the raw images, then that's why you work with Camera RAW. Now let's go ahead and add another graduated filter. Again, they just made this way easier to use. The Camera RAW has always been very powerful, but it's been just a little bit confusing in the past, in my opinion. So it's now it's the same level of power and not confusing. So double good. Here we go. If you guys checked out our recent episode on the hue adjustment tools, you now have access to those in Camera RAW as well. So if I wanted to make some hue changes to the sky, I could do that. Obviously not so applicable here. So I'm just gonna hit undo or just click here and, hit 0. If you wanna check out our recent episode on how to actually change hue in Lightroom, some incredible updates there. Click on your screen right now because that's actually, in my opinion, one of the most important updates Lightroom has added in years. So be sure to watch that. But as we can see, this looks fantastic. All of our tools are very intuitive, super, super easy to use. Now, we do have an option here on the bottom. I recommend clicking this option here. Very important. This is going to give us a few different a few different options basically on how it opens in Photoshop. I recommend using Adobe RGB 1998. That's a fantastic color space. I've been using it for years. Depth, I do recommend changing this to 16 bits per channel. It's gonna be a little bit more taxing on your computer, but you're gonna have more information to work with. Here at the bottom, this is probably the most important option within this dialog. Open in Photoshop as smart objects. That's really important because it's gonna allow you to get back into Camera Raw if you need to. So let's hit OK there. Boop, boop, boop. Now you can shift click and open a number of images if you'd like to. In this case, I don't need to. And we can see basically here's our original exposure. You know, well, I'll just click through them because it's not one exposure, it's many. And here's the HDR. Combining exposures really can give you the best of both worlds. So here at the bottom, it's gonna say open object. We wanna click on that. It's basically gonna convert this into a 16-bit layered file, okay? It's gonna be either a PSD or a TIFF when you save it, and it looks fantastic. By the way, you can download this on Phlearn.com. This is from a recent trip that I took. So if you want these raw images, they're from a Sony a7R IV, super high quality. You know, if I just zoom into 100%, we can see that they're absolutely fantastic. So if you just wanna play around with some high quality raw images, there you go, you get them for free. Now remember earlier when I suggested that we open our images as smart objects? That's super important because here you can see our layer in fact has a little smart object icon. And what this allows me to do is double click right here on my layer and we're back in Camera Raw, which is fantastic because, for instance, I could grab my graduated filter and you can click here and make any changes that you want. So for instance, if I want to bring this up a little bit and maybe bring the color temperature back a little bit cooler, I can completely change the color temperature here. Obviously, I can do things like change my exposure as well. All these tools are available to me because when we first clicked here, open in Photoshop as smart object was checked. So let's go ahead and hit OK. Now you're gonna see it takes just a second, but it's gonna automatically update here in Photoshop once again. So there we go. Any changes to either exposure or white balance, I highly suggest doing those in a RAW editor, either Adobe Camera RAW or Lightroom or any other RAW editor that you use. And then from there, doing more detailed editing like object removal and things like that in Photoshop. But white balance and exposure, in my experience, are just, you get a little bit more leverage when you're working in a RAW editor rather than using something like curves or levels. Little adjustments with curves or levels is totally fine, but if you need to like bring an exposure up like, you know, half a stop or a stop, definitely try to do that in a RAW editor if possible. So as you can see, the new Camera Raw is super intuitive. It was time for a facelift and I'm really glad they did it. I think it's just gonna make it a much easier piece of software to use. Most of the features are the same, but they did actually, at the same time they released the Camera Raw update, they included all those features as the new Lightroom as well. So being able to adjust hue, especially for just certain areas of your image, is a super big update. So don't forget to watch our episode on that as well, because honestly, it's kind of a game changer to be able to do that in a RAW editor. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give us a big thumbs up. Click on that subscribe button. We'll send you a free video every single week. Amazing. And if you want to learn even more in-depth techniques when it comes to Photoshop, Lightroom, and more, check out Phlearn Pro. Thank you so much. I'll Phlearn you later. Bye, everyone.